Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to our stage Artistic Director of the Washington National Opera and our host, FRANCESCA ZAMBELLO.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'll let everybody settle back there. Being introduced by the voice of God, I feel an incredible power surging up here this morning. Thank you for that. Grab your coffee. I know we want to start on time. Punctuality is crucial for everyone in the theater. We don't want to go into overtime. Oh, that I see resonated immediately with everyone. Okay, well, first of all, good morning. I would like to thank all the Opera America staff, headed by Mark SCORCA, all the members and trustees of Opera America who are here today, and especially to thank our Washington National Opera team, headed by my colleague, Executive Director Michael Mayle, for bringing all of this together here today. So shout out for that, man. I want to welcome everyone to Washington, D.C. I hope for each and every one of you that this conference and this city, our city, will enable you to find some inspiration and ideas for all the challenges we collectively face. We're all united together in this same quest despite our very diverse settings and company sizes, but I think of it kind of as a modern-day crusade, a culture crusade. We're all seeking the same thing. We all want to make the art form we love and cherish to survive and flourish. In our own way, I think that each one of us who are here are evangelists, populists, soapbox speakers for this art form. It is an art form that is inspired by the past, but I believe it can prove essential to the future. The new millennium brought us all a heavy dose of technology. It drastically changed our art form, and to some degree, it took away from the many ideas that I think we will be putting back in and thinking about in this conference. I believe we need to look back inside, back to content, ideas, connections to community, our surroundings, our civic, local settings, and even our governments. All of these things are part of this theme of civic impact, and I, for one, am on board to try and achieve this. Not just to put bums in seats, because we've all got to do that, but to produce opera from a viewpoint of social responsibility that will work and make all of us important arts leaders and drivers in our fields. Like everyone here, I think I'm trying to produce responsibly. I have a slightly different setting because I have one foot in a rural community, a challenged farming area, and another foot in a company in a major urban center based at the nation's premier arts facility. Both have given my teams and I great opportunities to establish new viewpoints. I am fortunate to have excellent staffs in both companies, and we have tried actually many similar ideas, but at the core of each of this has been our connection to community, finding new ways to approach education and to reach new groups on a more personal level. Community is a broad term, I get that, and each one of us has to define for ourselves what that is respective to our own companies. I often look to colleagues who are engaged in similar settings globally and nationally, colleagues like at HGO or Dallas, Philadelphia, Santa Fe, and I am so impressed with what everyone is doing. But it always leads me back to thinking, I have to be specific and personal to my own landscape. When I started at Glimmerglass, we made radical changes. We rebranded the name of the company as a festival and actually took the word opera out of the title. We repositioned all the programming, we cut ticket prices, and actually added $1 million to the budget. The goal was to make Glimmerglass a destination, an economic driver for a community, not just an opera company. We partnered with many institutions to open new doors to the visual arts, museums. We started a dedicated youth chorus. We filled the schedule with ancillary activities like concerts, cabarets, speakers like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, baseball specialist Mark Cuban. We created interfaith discussion groups ranging from our local mosque to the Amish church. We work with groups as diverse as the Dairy Farm Princesses, the Cooperstown Cotillion Club, the 4-H, the Boy Scouts, and it goes on and on. On our campus, we have added food options, which range from fusion cuisine, farm to table, to food trucks. We have tried to change what is the perception of opera. And after we did that, we changed the pricing. We went back to old-fashioned grassroots marketing, like visits to homes to sell tickets, cutting all tickets to $10 for anyone under 18, offering discounts to educators, locals, and opera virgins, focusing on what is our community. The result has been enhanced fundraising, better ticket sales, and 4 years of a balanced budget. But the most gratifying thing have been the stories of building audiences within our communities, especially in a 2-hour radius. Once you concentrate and figure out on who is your community, I think you can also find very civic-minded donors to see beyond the small circle of opera and make them realize how it can be a much bigger driver. We recently met with a donor and we told her, among many other things, we wanted to create family repertory. We wanted to bring opera to Attica Prison and to create a much broader community engagement. She gave us $1 million on the spot to follow our dreams and ideas. It's not always that easy, we all know that. Would that those donors would walk in the door every day, but they do sometimes. I have learned from Glimmerglass that focusing on building relationships throughout much wider communities has been the road to help us flourish. Washington is a very different reality, and it is important for each and every one of us to remember that we have different venues, locations, cities, communities, but I think that we must know our community as well as you know yourself. When I started here, I was partnered with Michael Mayo. We met in secret, and we decided that the company wanted to be bold, not beige. That was our secret motto between us. Now you all know it. We decided to work to make the company be truly identified with our name, National. So the challenge was how to create a brand here that would attract new audiences and not annoy our current audiences. Okay? We took the idea of national to mean hiring what America has best in all its artists. We wanted to make ourselves visible all season long so people don't forget opera. We expanded our repertory so there is always something happening from September to May. We did this by expanding our Young Artist program, adding a holiday opera, and creating a multi-tiered commissioning program producing a high volume of new works. So far, we have commissioned and produced 12 20-minute operas and 4 one-hour operas, with many more in the pipeline. For example, in the last 12 months, we have premiered a number of new works that have really built on making an impact in different communities. For example, we had an opera called An American Soldier about racism in the armed forces. One of the most gratifying experiences was a Marine in civilian dress standing up in the Q&A and telling me everything about racism in the military was true. He came back to another performance dressed in his blue uniform and spoke on the issue publicly. We just premiered a work called Penny, an opera about an autistic girl who finds meaning to her life through music. It brought us families with autistic children who might not regularly come to the theater. We revised Daniel Catan's Spanish language opera, Florencia, and that brought us new Hispanic and Latino audiences. This kind of response of seeking out new communities as well as energizing your audience has given us here in DC the strength of conviction to plan extremely varied works, not only the standard repertory, and let's not forget, we are here to also produce Aida, La Boheme, and Carmen, but more works that also connect specifically to our community. Next year, we embark on what I think will be one of the most diverse seasons imaginable for us. True to our name, we will be presenting 3 American composers never produced here before at the National Arts Center. Philip Glass will give us a new work, a revised work, Appomattox, about the dramatic end of the Civil War, and then again, the second act about the clash between LBJ and Martin Luther King, which resulted in the Voting Rights Act. Imagine an opera where everything actually happened here. We have a new opera by Luna Wolf called Better Gods about American colonialism in Hawaii, and then Kurt Weill's American opera Lost in the Stars. We at WNO now are really dedicated to bringing crucial political and social issues onto the operatic stage. The Kennedy Center is the nation's largest national arts center, and I believe that our works here should be and are poised to affect a large and diverse audience. Now, I know no one in any of your communities is like this. Everyone is different, but there are these things that draw us together. I know everyone is doing great work in their own communities and facing and working to address these challenges. But I say to affect change, program from your heart. Program ideas and real content. Make your company look like the world that you live in. Be socially responsible, and it will come back to you. To do this, of course, it does take special donors, people who believe in you, but most donors care about ideas. They do. We know that when we have that personal connection. And that's why we are so lucky at Opera America to have a chairman like Frayda Lindemann. Frayda is, if you go to the Met often, you will see her on all the levels talking to different people. She is a people person. She is, of course, also an incredibly generous donor and philanthropist, and the Young Artist Program is named after her. But I believe that she understands the need to accept and put forth ideas, to connect with communities. New York City is a community, and to reach out to people. So to have a chair like this for this organization with such a level of commitment is certainly far greater than any of us could even hope for. So let me introduce this wonderful ambassadress for the arts and for opera, Frayda. Thank you.
Wow, that's a good introduction, isn't it? Thank you, Francesca, for those generous words. Good friend, thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your very kind welcome. I'd like to especially express our gratitude, the gratitude of Opera America, to Jim Feldman, my colleague on the board of Opera America, and to the whole board of the Washington National Opera, for their very special effort to make this conference a success, and especially to the board chairman, Jackie Mars, who's a wonderful, wonderful, generous, sensitive woman and an old friend of mine. Many other Washington National Opera Board members were also generous with support and participation. So Opera America thanks all of you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be in this beautiful city at a perfect time of the year, but it's important for us to be here to recognize the work of one of our leading opera companies, resident at one of the most influential performing arts centers in the world. It's invigorating to realize that the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA's new director of music and opera, the president of the Kennedy Center, the artistic director of the Washington National Opera, the chairman of the Washington National Opera, and the chairman of Opera America are all women. Isn't that amazing? There's a session tomorrow about women leaders in opera, and you should definitely come and talk to us. We have a few opinions, you might think. It's also important to be here in Washington to make our voices heard in the halls of government. I came to appreciate this when a few years ago we held an Opera America Board of Directors meeting. Actually, it was 2 years ago, and a number of us went on Hill appointments, including myself. Many of you did that yesterday. I went with Christopher Hahn and Anthony Freud. We were a trio. I didn't make it to the last appointment because my feet gave out. So I excused myself and left the two very able gentlemen to carry on. We are blessed with many rights in this country, and one of those rights is to express ourselves to our legislators. They need to hear from us as much as they need to hear from people representing other causes and interests. A recent report issued by the National Endowment for the Arts documented that adults are 4 times as likely to attend the arts if they were introduced to them in school as children. Arts education matters. We all depend on contributions for our survival, so tax reform matters, especially the preservation of charitable contributions to arts organizations. There are many other issues that shape the world we live in and we work in. So please participate in our advocacy work. When you hear from our government affairs director, who's doing a brilliant job for Opera America and for all of us, Brandon Grid. Yay, Brandon. As well as the Performing Arts Alliance, please pay attention when they email you. I know it's nice to erase, but please. Increasing civic impact is the theme of this conference, and as many of you already know, producing opera just because we enjoy it is not a persuasive argument for support. Throughout the conference, you will hear about ways your opera companies can increase the public value of opera and opera companies in their communities. These sessions will focus on what we can all do from an organizational perspective. I'd like to talk about what we can do as individuals. The goal of increasing opera's civic impact has implications for us as individuals outside of our role as opera company staff, trustees, or audience members. Here it gets personal. Each of us is a community leader, whether it is the community of our friends and families or across a larger sphere of influence. People observe us, and they come to understand what we stand for. People who know me identify me with opera because they know I attend performances in New York City. They know I go to the Met's Ph.D. They know I serve as chairman of Opera America, and they know that I support young artists through my Lindemann program. So they identify me personally with opera. They know what I stand for, and this makes them think differently about opera. They're more open to opera, I think. If Frayda has devoted her life to opera, maybe there's something in it for me. If Frayda supports the arts, maybe we should too. And that's a good thing. Whether we like it or not, we model behaviors and values to those people who know us. If this is going to occur naturally, I propose we become more thoughtful about our actions to make it occur more purposefully. When I taught at Hunter College, it was much easier to teach the music majors. They had already learned the language of music and demonstrated the dedication required to play an instrument. It was more difficult to engage the general students who were indeed forced to take the course. But what made it much easier to teach opera rather than concert music, it was then and it still is. Opera is based on stories. We are telling stories. The stories of the 18th and 19th century masterpieces are universal. The stories of today's operas are more linked to the world we live in, but all the stories are about people, and new audiences can relate to them. Not even ballet, I have to speak quietly, is as interesting, even though Francesca said to challenge, even though it's very beautiful and the performances are really shorter. It's true. But opera examines the way people live with their lives and the consequences of their decisions. I know from introducing my own grandchildren to opera that children enjoy it. They can relate to the drama and the spectacle. They also love looking at all the other people in the theater. I was forced to take my 3.5-year-old, one of my grandsons, to the opera in New York. His mother forced me. And I said, let's wait 2 years. No, we have to go. Okay, so I took him to a very fancy dinner on the Grand Tier at the Met, and then I planned to do one act of the Met's Aida. Fine. I gave him my binoculars, and he spent the whole act looking at the other people in the theater, not at the stage. But it was a very positive experience. I've never had resistance from my children or my 12 grandchildren, 12, about the opera, because they know that I love it, and they know I think it's really valuable, and they know that I'm devoted to it, and it carries on to them. And believe me, I've never had any resistance. We can invite friends and coworkers to opera performances with us, and they'll catch on to your enthusiasm. We can talk about the opera everywhere we go. When people see me coming, I can hear them say, "Here comes the opera lady." That's okay with me. I like standing for something, and that's a good thing to stand for. I encourage you to think with your colleagues about how your opera companies can partner with other community organizations, as Francesca told us, how you can perform in alternative venues, how you can offer varied repertoire, and how to use electronic media to your advantage. But at the same time, please think about what you personally can do to increase the civic impact of opera and opera companies. Opera volunteers can play a tremendous role in building relationships. So it's particularly appropriate that Opera Volunteers International should hold their conference in conjunction with ours. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the president of Opera Volunteers International, RHONDA SWEENEY.
Thank you, Frayda. I would also like to say a very special thank you to Mark, not only for your leadership of Opera America for the past 25 years, but also your friendship and for welcoming Opera Volunteers International to this annual conference. This is our fourth with a fully integrated volunteer track of sessions and events. Thanks also to Leah Wilson on your staff for working closely with OVI's Sheila McNeil to ensure that our volunteers and others will have a great experience here in DC. Volunteers are an important element of the opera family, helping to extend the reach of the opera company into the local community and to announce to the community that opera is for everyone, everywhere. Increasing civic impact is what most of our volunteer support groups are all about, whether they are directly connected to an opera company or are independent. They act as docents, helping teachers prepare young students for special matinee performances. They host free opera previews and lectures within the community. They present mini recitals in community groups using singers from young artist programs. They organize and host opera auditions open to the community to identify up-and-coming talent. They act as ushers, greeters, ambassadors in the park, at the ballpark, and in other non-traditional locations where opera is performed. And in Houston, they even help with the annual art car parade, where the HGO art car is the prize-winning Brunhilde, a gigantic head complete with opera singer inside. As a past president of the HGO Guild, I can speak to the fact that these are only a few of the activities where volunteers engage with the community, making the case that opera is relevant to everyone, whether presented in the Opera House downtown or in less traditional spaces. In addition to volunteer time, monies raised by opera volunteer groups contribute significantly to community outreach and opera education programs. In 1971, OVI began as a networking organization for volunteer groups, traditional guilds, leagues, societies, or friends groups. We then expanded membership to include individual volunteers. More recently, smaller opera companies that work directly with individual volunteers and may even have volunteer staff members have joined, as well as a few music schools with volunteer groups that help raise money for student scholarships and student productions and engage the community in support of these productions. Beginning in 1986, OVI initiated a matching grant program to encourage the development of volunteer-led programs or programs utilizing volunteers in areas such as promotion, education, audience development, training, and fundraising, with special consideration given to programs directed toward disadvantaged or underserved groups, multicultural communities, or those not traditionally associated with opera. Given in January and March each year, we have awarded 73 grants over the past 30 years, totaling nearly $100,000 to OVI group members. These funds deliver essential programs using volunteers to extend the reach of opera into the wider community. Thanks to all of you who participated in our silent auction and raffle last year in San Francisco, we raised over $8,000, which went directly to the $11,000 in grants that we awarded this year to 7 member groups. At our roundtable session on Friday morning, we will share these and other award-winning projects with our members present here to ensure that everyone will benefit from these ideas. If your volunteer group is not yet a member of OVI, we hope you'll connect with one of our members at the conference to pick up a membership packet and join. Finally, a huge thanks to the Kennedy Center Friends for their volunteers who are assisting in many ways with this conference, including participating on a panel Saturday morning about their support to the wider community in Washington, D.C., in addition to the support that they provide for Washington National Opera. Best wishes for an outstanding conference experience, generating new ideas for increasing the impact that our companies, our volunteers, and our resources can have within our community.
Thank you, Rhonda. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Opera America's leader, our president and CEO, Mark SCORCA.
Thank you. Thank you, Frayda. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much. It's great to see such a full room, and especially to speak after such important and inspiring words from Francesca, from Rhonda, and from Frayda. I'm going to chat a little bit about our theme today and put it into a context for all of us to understand for the duration of our time together. Members of the Strategy Committee began discussing a new strategic focus in 2013. The initial objective was to help members increase attendance. But as they worked through the material, it became evident that a focus on audience building alone was not sufficient to ensure the long-term health of our companies. Even with significant growth in attendance, most opera companies will continue to derive the majority of their income from contributions. equal, if not greater, emphasis must be placed on underpinning philanthropy. They acknowledge, though, that it's increasingly difficult to raise more money to meet the rising cost of business as usual. However excellent they may be, grand productions of traditional repertoire alone do not compel donor generosity outside a narrow group of philanthropists. Increasing civic impact is a concept that captures members' interest in building the value of opera companies in their communities. Working alone and in partnerships that draw on opera's creative assets in authentic ways, opera companies can address local public priorities. In the thinking of committee members, these activities should not be one-sided efforts that simply use different words to describe what we already do. Rather, they should be new and different efforts that are rooted in our sincere interest to strengthen our communities. Our conference theme, identified over a year ago, reflects this commitment to thinking and acting differently in order to earn stature for opera and for opera companies as indispensable cultural assets. After increased ticket sales through the 1990s, opera companies in recent years have experienced declining attendance for main stage performances. The survey of public participation in the arts issued by the National Endowment for the Arts documents opera's attendance over the last 30 years. And you'll see here that we've gone from attracting 3% of the adult population in 1982 to 2.1% of the adult population in 2012. That is a decrease of about 30% of the population, the adult population attending opera. Data from Opera America's Professional Opera Survey is consistent with these findings. What you'll see between 2008 and 2012 is that every level company saw an average decrease in attendance. Level 2 at 13.5% and level 3 at 29.2%. We worry about these trends as we should, but it's important to understand them in a larger context. Decreased attendance does not demonstrate the failure of opera as an art form and may only be partially linked to the titles of the operas in a given season or our promotional strategies. Larger trends in the world around us force us to expand our thinking from just marketing PR to increasing civic impact. Globalization, the dot-com recession of 2000, 2001, and the Great Recession of 2008-09 have created widespread economic uncertainty. Recovery has been slow and uneven. The challenges facing middle-class families, who are the largest segment of our audiences, if not of our boards, are widely reported. Let's look at the facts. Generation Y faces some steep financial hurdles, reported in USA Today. The more than 50 million members may best be remembered for whether they can overcome the dire financial straits that plague many of them. Stagnant wages, job insecurity, the declines in employer-sponsored health benefits and declining retirement benefits, soaring debt, and minimal savings have jeopardized the economic security of an entire generation. Job data shows steady gains, but stagnant wages temper optimism, reported the New York Times. The increase in payrolls, several analysts said, indicated that the economy was gathering momentum, but the report also found that wages were rising only slightly faster than the rate of inflation, fueling debate about just how strong the labor market really is. Over the last 12 months, wages are up just 2%, which helps explain much of the disconnect between increasingly cheery assessments from many economists and the public's continuing discontent. In the New York Times, the middle class is steadily eroding. Just ask the business world. As politicians and pundits in Washington continue to spar over whether income inequality is in fact deepening, in corporate America there really is no debate at all. Investors have taken notice of the shrinking middle class. Shares of Sears and J.C. Penney have fallen more than 50% since the end of 2009, even as upper-end stores like Nordstrom and bargain basement chains like Dollar Tree have more than doubled in value over the same period. Newspapers are filled with headlines that discourage people from buying tickets and certainly from subscribing for tickets a year in advance. Look at some of these headlines. The vanishing male worker waiting it out. Many feel American dream is out of reach, poll shows. Regular bills, irregular work. Class of 2010 ushered in law school's lost generation. Ballooning student debt loan is seen as a potential financial crisis as balances and default rates climb. Young people in all professions finish college and graduate school with loans that sometimes approach the size of home mortgages. Except for people with high-paying jobs, these student loans linger well into middle age, delaying the time when people can become frequent ticket buyers and contributors. Student loan debt, an aging problem. Lingering student loan debt, which in recent years has been a drag on the economy as borrowers delay big-ticket purchases such as homes and cars, is affecting millions of people as they head toward retirement. More than 16% of the nearly $1.2 trillion in outstanding student loan debt is held by people over 50, according to the New York Federal Reserve Bank. It's one of the largest economic issues of our time, and it's not just a young person's issue. Americans are spending more on housing than ever before, reducing the amount of money available for purchasing tickets. Zillow's chief economist talks gentrification, Zestimates, and affordable housing. According to our numbers, renting has never been less affordable in this country. In more than 270 metros, you pay more than 30% of your income towards rent. And then, Street Easy's rent affordability study showed tenants who live in market rate units in New York City have a median rent-to-income ratio of 58.7%, nearly double the national average. When we ask ourselves about what happened to New York City Opera, I think we have to look at facts like this. Local newspapers have reduced arts coverage in many places, eliminating classical music critics entirely. Recently, Musical America circulated a report. Classical music in America has lost 2 more staff critics. Stephen Brown, critic for the Houston Chronicle for the last 2 years, was laid off at the end of January. Richard Sheinin, classical music and jazz writer for the San Jose Mercury News since 2003, has been reassigned to cover real estate for the newspaper. Neither will continue to cover music on a freelance basis for their respective journals. We read about studies and know of real-life examples documenting that people are participating less in civic organizations than they used to. The Rutland Herald reported on declining membership in the local VFW. In a meeting last year, the head of Washington's National Cathedral complained about declining attendance in church. He said that to boost attendance, they in church plan arts events. Okay. Maybe we should plan religious events. I don't know. Consider this a sermon. Increasing cultural and recreational options compete for time and disposable income. Electronic media provide 24/7 access to an infinite array of cultural programming. How many of us in this room have spent comfortable free evenings at home watching opera on YouTube? We're working longer, we're traveling more for work. Low-cost airlines have increased the chances that instead of attending a local arts performance this weekend, people will spend the weekend out of town. Now, I'm reminding you of what you already know, that the financial, psychological, and competitive barriers to attendance are high. The success of next season may depend not on your audience's preference for Verdi over Donizetti, but on how much your opera company matters to their everyday lives. At the same time that ticket sales have decreased, the cost of producing opera have escalated more than the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. Opera America's data reveals that during periods of program stability, the cost of producing opera increases at between 2 and 3 times the CPI, what we call the Opera Price Index, the OPI. The absence of savings through technology, dependence on highly skilled employees, competition for rare talent, and desire to improve quality each season drive the OPI. Using the Opera America constant sample group as the basis for comparison, earned income has decreased as a percentage of overall income for each budget level. And here you see between 2008 and 2012, each level has seen a decreased amount of income from box office and other earned income. This year is the first time where on average the ratio has dropped to 70-30% on 30% on average. Now, while this shift has occurred, competition for philanthropic support has become increasingly intense as more worthy organizations from other sectors have developed sophisticated fundraising skills. Unfortunately for us, healthcare, education, social services, and environmental issues attract more media attention than the arts, and the philanthropic curve tends to follow the front page of newspapers. The arts are burdened by negative impressions held by many people who view them as recreational choices of urban elites. Even Robert Reich, in his blog, wrote, "A large portion of the charitable deductions now claimed by America's wealthy are for donations to cultural palaces, operas, art museums, symphonies, and theaters, where they spend their leisure time hobnobbing with other wealthy benefactors. In terms of a tax deduction, it's the same as government spending. In Congress, if Congress ever gets around to revising the tax code, it might consider limiting the charitable deduction to real charities," says Robert Reich. Many donors feel, I agree, many donors feel there are more urgent needs in their communities than the arts. The Washington power couple, Donald and Ann Brown, have long been known for their generosity. For years, the couple has supported groups including the Washington National Opera, the National Symphony, Arena Stage, and more than a dozen schools. But now they want to see their dollars generate a palpable social return in poorer communities. Donald Brown said contributing to arts programs is important, but not a high priority for us anymore because it's not the same as giving to people who don't have a chance. The Los Angeles Times reports that givers who make the Chronicle's Philanthropy 50 list donated a combined $9.8 billion to all charities last year, up 27.5%. But gifts to two cultural categories, museum libraries and performing arts, dropped nearly 10%. Corporate giving has changed too. Grants are guided by marketing strategies and informed not by company leaders, but by customers and employees. KPMG surveyed 261 companies with median valuation of $16 billion, and the question was this: encouragement from which stakeholders group matters most in a decision to expand your company's investment in the community? Who guides the decisions to give? Is it government? No, none. Is it the media? Only 3%. Nonprofit community leaders like us? Only 3%. Shareholders? 14%. Boards of directors of those companies? 22%. Customers? Also 22%. But employees? 36%. The employees of companies are determining the corporate gifts. I pulled an article from AM New York that reported H&M recently announced that they are asking their customers to decide where the company should spend their charitable donations through crowdsourcing. This falls on the heels of other customer choose initiatives over the past couple of years, like Pepsi Refreshed and Target Gives. With increasing attention being focused on cause marketing and charitable initiatives, companies often turn to choice as a means of engagement. And since 92% of global customers say they would purchase products from a company with a social or environmental agenda, companies believe that offering choice makes them more appealing to a wider audience of consumers. But another article talked about the consequences of crowdsourced funding. It said more and more corporate initiatives are giving customers a chance to help direct where a company gives. But this just makes consumers less likely to give and companies less likely to make a focused impact. Now, I don't share these observations to kick the conference off to a depressing start. I really don't. But I share this information to illustrate how much we have to imagine a future characterized by new attention to community benefit of our work. Our product focus, at which we are so good, must become more balanced with a new level of community focus. At last year's opening session, I reported that the Constitution of the World Health Organization defined health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Our work in the Opera House and across communities, in schools, museums, libraries, community centers, and parks, has the potential to contribute to the health of audiences in this broader sense of health. There are notable examples of movement in this direction by our companies, and we will hear about some of their work in the course of this conference. More of it will be encouraged and documented in the year ahead. But it may provide some comfort for you to know that we have company facing these dilemmas, and since our host is also the general and artistic director of Glimmerglass Opera, I use a baseball reference. This is an editorial in AM New York. Baseball has lost its patriotic rationale. Rob Manfred, the new commissioner of Major League Baseball, should revive it, targeting the passions of today's youth. Several surveys of our millennials have revealed them to be concerned about the state of the country and profoundly committed to improving it. They're worried about education and the environment. What if both causes were advertised in all games and telecasts, with a fraction of all revenues going to schools and clean energy? That might appeal to younger Americans who want to do good while having fun. From the designated hitter rule in the 1970s to the speed-up reforms this spring, baseball has tried to recruit new fans by changing the rules of the game. But what our national pastime really needs is a new connection to the nation itself. Opera needs this too. Our next and very special guest brought the healing power of opera to National Cathedral after the events of 9/11. This afternoon, she takes a plane to Opera Theater of St. Louis to rebuild community cohesion in Ferguson, Missouri. We'll hear from her about her experience with opera as a transforming force in her own life and the lives of those around her through her good work. Please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming the great DENYCE Graves-Montgomery. There you are. Welcome, welcome.
Hi, Mark.
You made it. Come on in. Please, have a seat. It is so good to see you.
It's lovely to see you, too.
Well,
I haven't seen you in 100 years.
It has been a long time. Traffic was not kind, so...
Oh, my goodness, 2.5 hours.
We are so glad you are here.
Me too.
Thank you. When one hears about your life, it is filled with early examples of music mattering thanks to your mother and Thursday night music evenings and Saturday evening performances. And then, of course, you went to Duke Ellington School and
right here,
had a fantastic music teacher. You formed a group that was Inspirational Children of God.
I see you've done your homework. You can't believe how many knuckleheads I speak to who have no idea.
So I'm
it's a
curious,
pleasure.
From singing at home and singing in church, what connected you to Duke Ellington? How did you get to Duke Ellington School?
That's a gorgeous story. It's a beautiful story. Nobody believes this when I say this, but it's true. I'm one of three, and out of the three, I was the one most unlikely to find myself where I am today. Was the shyest and most awkward one out of the group of my brothers and sisters. So as you mentioned earlier, my family had a singing group. Because my mother was so conscious and my mother was busy raising 3 children on her own, and so she also worked 3 jobs, and she was concerned about the amount of time that we had outside of school, and she wanted to construct that time. And so we had this family singing group. And my brother is one who has a beautiful voice, and had he the interest and the drive, I think he could have made a very important career. But anyway, he sang all of the solos. And one day he got sick, And he said, I can't sing. And my mother said, you have to sing the solo. And I said, I can't possibly do that. There's no way that I can do that. And I cried and cried. This was early on, the first day of kindergarten. And I didn't want to be separated from my mother. And I cried and cried and cried and cried until they took me to music class. And there was a woman there who sang and who played the piano, and I just thought that she hung the moon. I'd never heard such a beautiful voice before. And after that, I loved going to school. And so from kindergarten through 6th grade here in Washington at the W.B. Patterson Elementary School, she was my music teacher. And from time to time, she'd give me little solos. And then when I graduated to go to middle school, unbeknownst to both of us, she became also the music teacher at this middle school. And I ran into her one day, and she said, you know, there's something called All-City Chorus. And it's exactly what it sounds like. And kids from all over the metropolitan area come together and form a choir and do concerts and that sort of thing. And she said, you enjoy singing so much, you should involve yourself with that. So she would come to my house every Saturday, pick me up, take me to the rehearsal, wait for me during the rehearsal, and bring me back home. Amazing
That's
woman.
extraordinary.
Amazing.
Did she bring you to your first opera at the Kennedy Center?
She brought me to my first opera at the Kennedy Center, but this story gets a little bit better. So when I when I left junior high school to go to high school, she said to me, "Where are you going to go for high school?" And I said, "I don't know." She said, "There's a performing arts high school here in Washington called the Duke Ellington School, and you've got a pretty voice, and you should audition for it." So I auditioned for it. I got accepted, and she became the principal of the school.
Wow,
Yeah. So she was literally my guardian angel, and she set me on the path.
It's amazing how her career path and your development just paralleled one another.
Absolutely. You
And,
know, it
and
was
she brought you to your first opera?
She brought me to my first opera. It was Fidelio and I just and what was great about that is that it was a dress rehearsal, so they were stopping and starting, and there were little disputes, and so that was great fun. And but I think that for me, the real thing that sort of grabbed me was I was late for class one day, and I ran into a girlfriend, and she'd just come out of a music library, and she said, "Denise, I've just heard something. You've got to come hear it." And I said, "I can't. I'm late for class." She said, "You've got to come listen to this." And so we went into the listening library. She'd found a recording of Leontyne Price singing Puccini arias. And we listened to the whole album, and after it was over, we said, "Let's play it again." She'd play it again. After it was over, play it again. 8 o'clock that night, the janitor knocked on the door and said, "You guys have to leave. We're locking up the building." We skipped all of our classes. We never ate. We never went to the bathroom, nothing. And we made a pact that day. We said, "I don't know what this is and who this woman is, but that's what we want. We want to become just like her." She and I made a pact. We went to Germany together on an exchange program. We both went to Oberlin College Conservatory. We were roommates. We both studied voice at the conservatory, and we set on this path to become like Leontyne.
Wow. And what's your friend doing now?
Well, she's not singing. She enjoys it now, but she's leading a very, very different life, but supports it. And she comes and sees me and everything, and lovely.
When you think about that incredible developmental arc, is there something based on the knowledge you have now that you wish the opera company might have done to encourage you as a young singer? Were there programs you would have wished the Washington National Opera had in those days that you see other opera companies administering now?
Well, there was at that time, I mean, they had, they extended these dress rehearsal tickets and tickets to, specifically to the Duke Ellington School. So I think that was wonderful, and that exposed so many people to, so many young people to opera. But when I ran into a friend, Ann Owens, as I was coming through the door, and when I was doing my apprenticeship at Houston Grand Opera, they sent me out on a series of educational outreach, and that was a very interesting thing, and I was proud to be a part of that. And we went into schools, and we went into community homes, we went into prisons, we went everywhere, and we'd do about 6 or 7 of these informances a day where we would speak, sing a little bit, talk about it a little bit, and that I found to be, for me, it was an incredible teacher, because you know, when you have to perform in front of a group of 5-year-olds, you learn right away, you know, what you've got to do and how truthful you are. But I know that there are programs. I know that there are programs like that that I have seen in my work in this country in particular, spring up all over the place in terms of educational outreach. I was not exposed to anything like that, but I was pleased to have been on the other side of that and to bring that. So maybe something like that would be. But I remember being in school, and I remember every single assembly, and whenever there was a master class or whenever there was an important personality that came and gave their time to the kids, you never forget those moments. So it's made an indelible, impression in my
and the
life
importance
experience.
of having a great teacher who on her own could find dress rehearsal tickets and to have her own initiative.
Well, I think that actually came from the Kennedy Center, actually.
Really?
I think it came from the Kennedy Center from Washington, what was at the time Washington Opera, that they extended these tickets towards for the Duke Ellington students.
In some sort of formal way that they had a relationship.
And I think that relationship still exists. When I was a student there at the conservatory, we would sometimes be involved in at the School of Music, we would sometimes be involved in choruses. Kennedy Center at that time had a summer opera theater, and I was involved in that, and as were many of my colleagues, many of my schoolmates, in the summertime, and also
Even at the high school level?
Yeah, at the high school level, yeah.
That's
And I know that now they're doing something with regard to stage and design and that sort of thing. So from what I hear, they are expanding that outreach and really involving the young developing artists of tomorrow. So.
Let's talk a little bit about repertoire, because you have, of course, triumphed in wonderful 19th century works. We think of Carmen and Samson and Delilah as just two of your greatest roles. More recently, you were in the world premiere of Champion and Doubt. And I will say that your pizzicato accompanied aria in Champion is just one of the great moments.
Did you see that?
I was there.
And it's coming to Washington Opera.
I know, and it's. Did Cheska write that into your contract?
Sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. I let the cat out of the bag.
So even though. So those who are listening on the live stream, you did not hear that. You did not hear that yet. Repertoire in connection to audience. Champion just resonated on so many different levels. And Carmen can enchant, and Samson and Delilah can win people over because it's so gorgeous. But here you had a piece, Champion, that resonated with the African American community, with the gay community. It was just timeless and very relevant. How do you feel as a performer in doing works that are contemporary and that connect to current issues?
For me, there was a great sense of freedom. I know that and also Doubt, which we did, and I think Doug Cuomo may be here somewhere. I know he's coming later. Some years ago, we premiered Richard Daniel Poor's Margaret Garner.
Absolutely.
And with that piece, as was with Champion, I felt a tremendous liberation, and I felt like oftentimes we take those works to our coaches and to our voice teachers. And for those particular stories, I thought, I got this. I know this story. I know what this is all about. This hits right at the core, and certainly was the case for Margaret Garner as well as was Champion. It was just so real. I remember reading the libretto, and I thought, are we going to be able to say this in the opera house? My goodness, you know. I understand that there was a good taste committee that had to approve, a bit of the language, as it were. But it was just, it's such a gritty and honest work that for us, I said many times working on it, I felt that it made champions out of all of us, because we had to work so closely and so thoroughly with Terrence and with our wonderful director, and they workshopped it and until it was something that, I think that we could all be proud of, but it was something that everyone could relate to. And that's what I loved so much about it.
Did you feel a difference in the audience response? Because
Absolutely.
How was the audience different in a performance?
Well, first of
Hamlet?
all, it's in English, right? So that makes a huge difference.
Sure.
So there's no barrier there where that's concerned. It's a story that maybe some people remember. I think the difficult thing with telling that story, am I able to say this? I've put my foot in my mouth once already.
Go for it.
Is that because this was the life story of Emil Griffith, this boxer who was, I guess he was homosexual. And I say that because we sort of outed him. It was not something that he'd ever acknowledged publicly, himself. And so there was great amount of care and I think trepidation where that was concerned, because we were just reflecting on an experience that happened. So there was that, which was a big issue, but it was something that made people uncomfortable, I remember, trying to decide whether I would let my children see the opera or not, and we had and I said to my husband, I think they should go because this is such a magnificent work, and I'm proud of what it is that we're doing and what we're saying. So we had, which they have named the bad word breakfast, this conversation where we talked about how people use words as weapons to hurt other people. And we covered the spectrum because of what happened in the Emil Griffith story, where during the weigh-in, he didn't realize that his opponent knew Spanish, and so he called him a very derogatory word in Spanish. And that's what led to his hurt and his fury and his revenge. And I don't know if you know the story, but it's about the welterweight Emil Griffith, who, am I allowed to really get into this? Okay.
Sell tickets.
And he was, I guess, he was a little bit of everything. Because he was married for a while, but he was one of 9 children. And his mother sort of farmed them out to different family members, his siblings, because she was unable to take care of them. But he was with an aunt who was very abusive. And she used to make him, he was interested in making hats. He wanted to work in a millinery to design wonderful hats. And his aunt used to make him, as a punishment, stand and hold center blocks. And what that did was create a tremendous strength in him. And he went to this hat factory looking for a job, and the head of the factory at that time said, "You have the body of a boxer." And so they trained him for 1 month, and he became this incredible boxer. And then when he was going to fight this fight that brought him into great notoriety, his opponent, whose name escapes me at the moment, Benny Parrott. Exactly, Benny Parrott, called him a derogatory name. And then later that evening in the ring, they got into the fight and he killed the guy. And one of the beautiful quotes from that opera is that I killed a man, and the world
forgave me.
The world forgave me, and I loved a man, and the world wanted to kill me.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's a very, very powerful story, and it's told by 3 different
generations.
3 different generations. Spectacular. Yeah. But anyway, there's lots of language. And and I thought, and my character comes right out swinging, right away, and dropping everything. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is really good. But was that a great deal of fun, though, for us? But I would say that we were all very concerned with how it would be received. I'd not ever been a part of, nor have I seen anything so far in the theater that was that raw. Yeah. And that hit that directly.
And is so beautiful and is so operatic.
So powerful and completely operatic.
Yeah, it's really remarkable.
Gorgeous.
Can you tell us what your project Church is?
Oh, you know, I saw, as I was coming in, I saw one of the models for 3 Decembers, which I'm going to be doing later on this year. But the librettist was a good friend of mine, Jean Shear. So I was having lunch with Jean Shear, and we were just chatting about growing up in the church. And I said, well, you know, Kathy Battle grew up in the church, and Jesse Norman grew up in the church. So it's very, very interesting if you look at a lot of opera singers who got their start in the church. And Jean said, well, probably not just opera singers. If you look at R&B, and if you look at Broadway, and if you look at those who stay in, those who remain in gospel, and throughout all these genres, we thought, would it be an interesting project to look at all these women in all these different disciplines who got their start in the church, and who, you know, bled out to these different areas. And that's what the project was, and thought, won't that be a great idea to get together these group of women and talk about their experiences growing up in the church. And so that project was born. It's a few years old now, and we did a CD-ROM with it where we spoke with all of the different, and there was Patti LaBelle, and there was, Shirley Caesar, and En Vogue, and lots of, I don't remember everybody that was involved in it, but talking about their experience growing up in the church and how they made their departure from that into their respective, you know, genres.
And we have a couple of opera companies that have really wonderful programs of opera singers working in churches where there's still a great music tradition. The church is such an important link for discovering young singers and finding audiences.
Absolutely.
Now, all of this is a lead up to hearing from our special guest, Roberto Bedoya. Roberto is the executive director of the Tucson Pima Arts Council. There's a program that he has there that I'm fascinated about called PLACE, People, Land, Culture, and Engagement Initiative. And it's a civic engagement placemaking platform for artists who have projects that address critical community issues. Throughout all of my remarks this morning, I've avoided using the word belong or belonging. And if you'll read in the essay that's on our website that Roberto wrote that brought me to invite him to speak to us today, belong and belonging mean a lot to him, and I think it needs to mean a lot to us as well. So if you will please, while Denise and I sit here and enjoy his good words, welcome Roberto Bedoya.
Thank you, Mark. You forgot the arts and belonging. People, land, arts, culture, and engagement. Place. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Place initiative and have some images to show you. But first of all, I just want to thank Mark for extending me this invitation, and thank you for being here. I am not from the world of opera, so I'm a little nervous. As I sort of joked with Mark when he extended me the invitation, I said, I really don't know a lot about opera. I do know a lot about divas, including my own behaviors on occasions. But these remarks are not about trafficking in stereotypes, but some reflection on belonging and the civic we, the plural, and the theme of this conference, increasing civic impact. In Tucson, Arizona, which we were chatting earlier, is a very odd place, and you'll get to see images about home. We're close to the border. We're the 7th poorest city in the nation, which is kind of an odd thing because it's so beautiful. But there I instituted this sort of Place initiative, this civic engagement platform that supports artist projects that address critical community issues. The idea of belonging is a poetic mark of how the 66 projects to date funded by the Place Initiative have shaped our civic landscape. Through art practices and activities, they engage with folks' social concerns, personal memories, cultural histories, imagination, and feelings to enliven a sense of belonging within the participants and the audiences they reach. To understand the civic impact of Place projects, we must view them as art practices that weave ethics and aesthetics into engagement projects. Through these projects, they have collectively shaped the identity of Tucson and allow us to to feel a sense of belonging within it. They operate in the social space of dialogue and deliberation, present visions and manifestations of social cohesion, and activate democracy so as to build the commons, illuminating how an aesthetics of belonging happens on city blocks, in performance venues, classrooms, at neighborhood centers, in churches, and is characterized by short and long-term relationships among individuals. The Place Initiative creates opportunities for experiences, ones that are deliberate and grounded in art practices designed to engage the expressive life of the civic we. Whether accidental or deliberate, this kind of art practices is critical to creating a sense of belonging. So how do we belong? How do we present ourselves as the plural? Through voting, through our attendance at conferences, through our participation in making art and producing art. How does opera give form to belonging? Through engagement practices that shapes the civic, the plural, and the we. 2 quotes. Our experience of the beautiful in the recognition of models that make world and community is restricted to that moment when these worlds and communities present themselves explicitly as the plural, from an Italian writer named Gianni Vattimo. Quote, a second quote, quote, we is not the plural of I, end quote, Emmanuel Levinas. These quotes circle in my head and prompt me to think about beauty and the we. Beauty as the articulation of the plural announced in engagement practices. It's the experiences I know I've been lucky to support in my career. We is not the privatized we of me and my friends. I'm a Pepsi, you're a Coke, I'm a PC, you're a Mac. That kind of privatized we thing is really irritating. But I'm thinking about a we that includes people you don't know. It is that democratic ideal of we the people who belong to a just and equal society. Opera and the will. Opera and the we, excuse me. Opera and the we. Sounds like a new American opera. How does opera tell the story of belonging? I believe the story of belonging is tethered to ethics, aesthetics, and the social contract between artists, arts organizations, and audience. Key to understanding this contract are the ways of engagement and metaphor. And by metaphor, I mean poeses, the bringing into being associated with civic, the plural, and the we. As I said earlier, I'm not a big opera person. However, when I was extended the invitation to speak here, as part of my research, I attended 3 operas, La Boheme, Eugene Onegin, and Tosca in San Francisco, Tucson, and Chicago. They were a wonderful experience. They produced in me that kind of pleasure of how one is outside of understanding and gains new knowledges. Like I've got a hungry appetite for newness. So that was like really fresh. But these sort of random thoughts about those experiences, it reminded me of my tias listening to telenovelas, loving these soap operas. That the language was a sort of form of bubble speak that you find in graphic novels. The texts up there were telling me all this stuff, and I said I gave up on that because there was something about the combination of voice, gesture, staging that was very seductive. And then finally, I really dug the fans. You were talking earlier about taking your grandson to the opera. Well, I was kind of like that too. I was sitting in the balcony, I remember, in Tucson, and somebody downstairs was yelling, bravo, and I thought, man, that really pushed his button, really. It was good, it was good. But I was more intrigued by how it got here. So that's just my sort of wonderful experience with opera most recently. But let's shift here to reflect on the anxieties and actions of disbelonging that happen in life, whether through politics, policy, prejudice, or commerce. How does the opera field reflect on disbelonging? Is the opera business model caged in a you pay to belong practice, sitting assignments, big donor pursuits, your capital campaigns? How does the perception of eliteness associated with a discipline foreclose civic possibilities? Are the engagement practices caught up in the frame of the white savior industrial complex with all that paternalistic methodology of how to engage, we're going to save your life? Believe me, after SB 1070, and which was sort of the beginning of an intense period of racial profiling in Tucson of Latinos, and then there's all this political toxicity in Arizona that I can go on to. But there's a lot of people who are just calling me up and say, you have an engagement platform. I need to come down and help you. I said, man, first of all, you just got to park your attitude over there, because it's really not, you were saying like I needed to be saved. I don't need to be saved. The laws need to be changed. That's simple, So this kind of engagement practice needs to be very thoughtful about how you work with other communities. How do you build social cohesion, trust, and engagement? As the executive director of a local arts council, my charge is to serve the public, from the white gloves to the anarchists. And they all knock on my door and tell me what to do with my public funds. I listen to them knowing how their story is primarily a story of self-interest. And for me, the work is how do I turn their narrative into a story of best interest for the community? How do I move from positions of self-interest to best interest and then to a position of shared community value? That's the work. So I'm going to jump to the slides here so we can talk a little bit about some of the work. You can get it quick, and I'm going to go through this quickly. Is that like how much time I have left?
No, don't worry about that.
So we funded a project in which we did the R&D about called, there are about 200 people die each year crossing the desert. And so most of them are, a great number of them are women who are really traveling to reconnect with family members. So this was just kind of an oral history project that turned into a theater piece based on the narratives of the women crossing the desert. The next one, I'm going to go quickly. So the guy in the green is a border patrol. So I was joking earlier about, this is a pretty significant presence, and they'll come and ask for your papers often. This was a piece based on how women, this is complicated, but how women, the women in Tucson who do not have their papers, how they raise their kids who are legitimate American citizens, and what they do to negotiate public space. And I just found this. So this is a theater piece based on that. Next one. Festival culture is very important in my part of the world, based on sort of Latino traditions and Native American ceremonies. So this is sort of a wonderful festival that we produce based on kind of the Day of the Dead. So it's a hybrid of Burning Man, Day of the Dead, and circus acts. Next. So about 50,000 people walk through town dressed in Dias Los Muertos face. Our Tucson is a big refugee community city. We get a lot of refugees from North Africa, so this is one called Finding Voice. And it really was about a project about teaching sort of acculturation, if that's the right word. I don't know how you can teach that. It comes. Another example. This was a photography project. They went to another refugee group, the Alampatha group, went to go back to next one, that one there. They kind of go to the reservation, the Tohono Nation, and kind of work on food harvesting practices. Next one. This is a project in which we train community scholars to really tell the stories of their lives. Again, being on the border, anthropologists love us. They want to study the native folk. They want to study the brown folk and our folk ways. And so this was to flip it a little bit, to teach neighborhood folks to be their own community scholars and figure out how to tell their own stories. The classroom. I love this this project, because when the Chinese Exclusionary Act happened on the West Coast right around the Civil War times, all the Chinese were sent to Mexico, basically. They were kicked out of the country. They came back across the border and ultimately ended up opening up the corner markets in pretty much any Southwest community. So this is an oral history project. This is the original families that owned this when it was a Chinese market. Now it's a Mexican market. So that we did that. And so you get these beautiful child like this one, kind of mixed race on. This was a project that dealt with the fact that historically environmental poisoning has happened an awful lot, where they dump toxic waste in poor neighborhoods. So this is called a Barrio Sustainability Project, and so it was an effort to try to clean the land and reclaim the land as being their land in a way. Next. This was about, believe it or not, we have a river, we have no water, and this is our river, and this is about sort of stewardship, the concept of stewardship and water conservation, which is really important to us. This is a community dance piece. This is an intergenerational piece between a youth bicycle kind of repair shop and a senior center. Again, mariachi movement is really, I figured, I was looking through slides, I said, I'm speaking to opera, I gotta find some music. So here's my, the mariachi music movement in America really started out of Tucson, and this group has been around for 40 years. So it's a really strong movement among a youth culture there. Next one. This is sort of a participatory public art project, and was trying to imagine how, if you were going to design a streetcar line, where you would go. So this is a design that was based on a streetcar line stopping at Circle K's, which is our version of, you guys may have 7-Eleven. So like, if you were, instead of going to the mall, you went to the Circle K store. It would probably be, you'd probably get a number of poor people on the transit authority going to where they shop. Next one. So, as anybody knows in this business, you have to talk about impact, and you want to often data. We came up with some what we call social impact indicators. So we ask all of our grantees to talk about their projects in terms of these areas: engagement, empowerment, stewardship, cross-cultural understanding, bridging differences, aesthetics, and community health and well-being. So this becomes our little evaluation template. Next one. So this is a report, and I'm going to leave it there. So, so these are some images of engagement, and maybe give you a little insight into what that means for my part of the world and how artists can really advance civil society. They illuminate an environment of belonging, as well as an ethos of belonging. How is opera an environment of belonging? How is opera grounded in an ethos of belonging? How do you do this work? I don't have a game plan, really, and people ask me, like, how do you do this? A lot. And I said, well, man, I don't know. You just really have to start off with this sort of notion. You have to know when you're a guest and when you're the host. And so when you proceed in these relationships with partners, the church, the school, you may start off as a guest, and then before you know it, you may be a host. So just constantly think about those sort of characteristics when you do engagement work. I see engagement art practices as a social movement of belonging. It is alive and active. It is a movement that shapes the ethical and aesthetic experiences of belonging to a community where concern, care, and imagination animate and make more meaningful our lives together. It is the bringing into being the civic we. And finally, my last comment is, because I'm a dreamer And I happen to have papers. For those who got that joke, thank you. Finally, because I am a student, can I think of opera as a form of liberation theology, creating stories of justice, beauty, and peace as an articulation of the plural? Thank you.
Roberto, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I have to tell you that Chicago Lyric Opera just did two mariachi operas.
I missed it by
Good.
a week.
I
saw Tosca.
So we are going to have Roberto with us through the entire conference, and he's going to be listening and observing, and we'll hear from him at the closing session a little bit more about his concept of belonging, a little bit more about the guest-host relationship, about what he hears us talking about and the dynamics of our commitment to serving community in new and different ways. I know that Denise has to make a plane to get to St. Louis to do great work in Ferguson, so thank you for doing that. Roberto, thank you for your introductory remarks, and ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. I know that Kurt would like me to ask you all to leave the room because we have to break it up for the next set of sessions. So please applaud generously and then move and get some coffee. Thank you.
I want to talk to you, Mark, about something that I'm working on.